Good morning and welcome to the Enrichment Friday program for January 22nd, 2021 in the basically Selective Admissions Workshop, Competitive Admissions Workshop. If somebody can maybe give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. This will be recorded and placed on the Enrichment Friday archives as well too. Thank you, Jack's iPad. A PDF of the presentation is attached, as well as kind of an agenda to take notes on as well too. So let's kind of dive right into this selective admissions workshop. I've been doing this type of presentation for over 20 years now, and it used to be a lot different. You can kind of get a sense. It's like, oh yeah, Cornell has a 40% acceptance rate. Other schools, 35% acceptance rate, very competitive, but still definitely doable. But things have changed over the years, and it did start off as kind of like more like Ivy League, then it became competitive, then it's selective admissions, but known as the Ivies. It kind of started out that way because it was an athletic conference, and the last one of the trivia's questions is, who was the last member of the Ivy League to join? And it was Cornell. And it's between Cornell and another school in New York which also began with the letter C, and that was Colgate. So Colgate was almost an Ivy League school. Over the past 12 years, students have received over 415 offers of admissions from colleges and universities that would be quote unquote the top 100 schools. What are those top 100 schools? It could vary from person to person, from methodology to methodology. I basically used years ago the 2009 U.S. News World Report to basically, okay, here's the top 50 national universities, top 50 liberal arts colleges, and that was the top 100. And that list really hasn't changed because some schools come on, some schools drop off. So anybody's top 10, top 50, top 100, will vary, from year to year. If you're not familiar with who I am, I'm the college guru, sensei, college helper, as somebody referred to me earlier today, or this year. Maybe college soothsayer, probably not. But I've been pretty active when it comes to seeing what different schools look like, visiting them, as well to being really kind of hooked into what's going on currently, but also future issues when it comes to the profession. And just back in December, I was recertified again as a certified educational planner. And as you can see, we are few and far between, few but mighty. So yes, I do read higher education news quite often, and so it's a little bit of my background. When it comes to selective admissions, probably like the most important thing revolves around the curriculum from first year, second year, third year, fourth year in high school, and also the semesters in between during the summer. And more students are pursuing that as a route to bolster their academic programs. But I think one of the biggest things is students who just love learning, who are curious, and that will show through in many different ways. And as one of my colleagues has indicated, it's they just keep questioning, and look deep into their own field of study, but also broadly into others as well too. I don't know if you heard the news earlier this year, or this week actually, that the College Board will be phasing out the subject test by the end of this academic year, and also the essay portion of the SAT as well too. So that remains to be seen what that impact is, for other parts when it comes to selective admissions. Everybody thinks it's the be all and end all, and more so than ever before, it is not. A lot of schools this year saw anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the applicant pool not submit test scores, either because they couldn't take a test or by design. So it is one part of this process. You may read that a lot of schools are test optional, but in some cases, some schools will require tests for perhaps honors programs, highly selective programs, or scholarships as well too. But keep in mind, test blind and test optional are two different things. Some schools call it test unnecessary, test we don't look at it, and those truly are schools that won't consider test scores. But circling back to the change in the College Board, what would this mean for other tests? Because they've also talked about rolling out an online version of the SAT, and what that's going to look like, how it's going to be scored, remains to be seen. And they've seen a decrease over the past 10 years of the subject test basically dropping by 50%, or dropping by, I think I'm like 200%, and AP exams like going up by that rate as well too. So will the new improved test be the AP? Who knows? We shall see. When it comes to letters of individual evaluation, those are part of the process as well too. But some schools basically say, do not send recommendation letters. We receive 55,000 applications. We don't have the time to read them. But generally students, will get one school counselor, college advisor recommendation letter, one teacher recommendation letter as well too. But I think what's important is like kind of what goes in it as well too. And that's like what we know about a student inside and outside of the classroom. And it's a whole true at the college level as well too. Some students will ask a professor, can you compose a recommendation letter for me applying to graduate school? Professor could say one of two things: sure, no problem, let me know when it's due, or give me a resume. And if you don't want the latter, you want the former, because you've had that professor in class 3 times, you sit in the front row, you ask lots of questions, you might be a teaching assistant, maybe a research assistant. So it's important to start building these connections, whether through a counselor, teacher, administrator, as well too. Maybe just kind of with things in news recently, when I was at the University of Delaware, my first year, I was reading a folder for an applicant. It was it was from somebody in Delaware, Senator Biden, and I was like, oh, this is really important. And the people that I was working with, they're like, just file it. I'm like, isn't it important? They're like, look up this other kid. So I look up this other kid. I'm like, and I read their recommendation letter from Senator Biden. It was very similar. So. And that's true. A lot of places like, oh, that's an important name. It's like, not really. Sometimes it's just a form. So it was just a interesting slice of life when it comes to admissions. With the less emphasis on testing, in some cases, there's going to be a lot more emphasis placed on the written word, that's required of students. And this does take, I think, the biggest amount of time when a student applies to school. The good news is you can start early. So students that are juniors right now should look on the common application to see what the essay questions are for this year, because more than likely they're going to be the same for their senior year, for next year. That usually becomes announced March, early April. So yeah, students can kind of get a head start in terms of writing as well too. I would also recommend students to kind of start keeping copies from 9th grade on of graded writing samples, and maybe even ask a teacher, as you turn in a written report or project, to grade it very closely and to write comments on it. Some schools may want to see graded writing samples. With the essay kind of going away for the SAT essay part, this could be used instead of. So I think that's, something that people can do even now. Generally, they'll want an essay from 400 to 600 words. Keep it within those parameters. Some schools will ask supplemental questions. Why do you have an interest in Muhlenberg? Or why do you have an interest in occupational therapy? And I think again, those types of questions students can kind of start looking at now, and maybe you start crafting responses. And I would also recommend students to kind of put a lot of emphasis into that as well too. Some places may ask for interviews. If it's optional, I would say do it. By and large, they really won't impact the admissions decision process whatsoever. I think it's a good way for schools to keep alumni involved, and it's almost like a recruiting tactic as well too. But yeah, I would say students get to prepare, know stuff about yourself, some current events, what's going on. It's in a way to kind of get see what that school is like as well too. Activities. More is not necessarily better. Some schools, you would read an application and this student would do everything under the sun, but we didn't still have a better sense of who they are. So sometimes less is more, but to pursue things that one would really have, an interest in. So I think that's, important when it comes to, co-curricular endeavors. With volunteer work, maybe try, the community service, maybe try to match that up with your potential career interests, if that is possible. See if you're able to have, when it comes to community service, like breadth, depth, and impact. So if you do it over a long amount of time, and can codify like how many hours worked, and you've distributed 312 coats and 500 mittens to community organizations, it's like, okay, that gives us some idea of like the work that was that went into it. For students, when it comes to this, ask questions. You'll read a lot of stuff, you may question a lot of things. Again, be curious. You might think, a certain school is like really great, and you do some research and you're like, you ask some more questions. It's like, okay, maybe it's not so as good as people tout it to be. Or this other school, it's maybe not as well known, but you look at it a lot closer. It's like, wow, they do have a great program in archaeology, and they ask students to travel to another site, different sites their sophomore year and junior year, and all these other schools that are big name don't do that. So it's important to definitely do a lot of research. Some students ask, like, what does it take to get into these types of schools? And I'll say, be interesting. And they'll ask, like, how do I do that? I'm like, be interesting. I mean, it's really what you want to follow through on. And that interest in learning more about yourself and other things, you will show through in various parts of the application process. When I meet with students, usually the junior year, a lot of students will have a lot of their schools they're considering, but I also present anywhere from 4 to 10 other colleges to consider as well to research. In terms of like the results, when students apply to colleges based on their own picks over the past 15 years at Ryken, students are accepted at like about a 54% rate based on their choices. The national admit rate on average is around 64, but if students follow up on my recommendations, it's at 84%. Sometimes it's a little higher, tad lower, it all depends. I'm not out to pick a school. I'm just out to do some research for students, say, hey, consider this, given your criteria, you may want to strongly follow up on it. When it comes to, oops, go back one, the admissions process for selective schools, what is the differential? What makes one student stronger than another? Colleges don't have, admissions people don't have like a checklist that they, sit down and like, okay, they got this, it's done. More often than not, it's students, individual applications, not side by side, one versus the other. They're read individually, given certain parameters. Some schools will do team review. So one person will focus on the academics, another person will focus on other aspects of it, and they'll come to a recommendation and for the larger committee to review. So there's a lot of, I think at one point I counted at least 60 different factors I could look at in terms of whether to admit, deny, waitlist, maybe ask a student to have a second choice of a major, maybe wait for mid-year grades. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. But I think some things that really serve as tipping points is one's interest in an institution. Could it be visiting a campus? Could it be taking summer school courses, these days online or on campus? Sending test scores if one takes a test, attending webinars online. I mean, colleges can really go down in terms of when students create an account and start searching through the website. They can see how long a student's been on, what sites they go to, how long they are on, how many clicks. So it's also very, very technical for some things that kind of lead into demonstrated interest. Some schools don't do it, but some do. So it will vary. I think one way to really stand out is to put some time and thought and effort in terms of one's future. I think that's scary for everybody, but as I remember, I was so many years ago as a high schooler, it was like the future is like the coming weekend or the next week. But I think students who are like strivers when it comes to like what they what they may want to do down the road, again, you don't see that level of thoughtfulness and intent in a lot of applications. A lot of people recommend to have a passion. I think in order to do that, I think you really have to know a lot about what you're talking about, but also the drive to know even more. And that's where passion comes through. It can be, I don't know if it can be manufactured, but I just have a feeling that shows through. I remember clear as day when I was starting to play my sport, volleyball, yes, playing, but I would just remember going to matches on a bus and reading the latest issue of Volleyball magazine because I wanted to learn more about how the Cubans do their training, how the Poles run an offense, what the Russian blocking schemes are like. So I just needed to know more. It didn't help. I didn't grow to be taller to play that as well as I could, but I did have a passion to know as much as I could. And I think at the next stage, with that passion, you incorporate that into your life, and not just for like a few weeks or a few months, but it becomes such a longer term commitment. Then it becomes your purpose. So I think that, and again, that is something that I would think is rarely seen when it comes to college admissions, but when it's there, it's like, it's clear as day, you can truly see it. And also, just true intellects, people that just love learning, love reading, take numerous courses because they just love that subject matter. And it can be, like I said, it can be shown in what students read, what they write about, course offerings. They may even take senior year. So I think there's a lot of ways to really differentiate yourself in this admissions process. And I think schools are much more attuned to this because for so much of this over the years, it could be very mechanistic. You could do this and this and this and this, and that looks good. But now they're looking for more, not more, but just different as well too. I'll show you some of the books. We'll get to these. And again, these are, I would also recommend for students to take a look at the article. I'll post it outside my office as well too. There's a lot of other schools than just the Ivy Leagues. I would say a lot of our students, are more than willing and able to travel. So I think that's one great way of looking at other institutions that you may have heard of this school. It's like, well, then check out this school. A lot of major universities will have honors programs. So to make be like almost a smaller college within a larger university. Some programs are much more structured. Others, you just take a couple courses, and after your freshman year, you can just stop out of it, or you can pursue on with an honors program degree. A number of schools also fall in the category like colleges that change lives. A place like a Goucher or Allegheny, where I went to, that I think really coach up students, and they're wonderful places to learn and grow, and they serve as a great springboard, whether it's for graduate school or beyond. And there's also schools that weren't so hard to get into about 10, 15 years ago. Now they're hard, and now they're really well known. You know, whether they call them the new Ivies, maybe even places, you know, abroad as well too. So there's a lot of like great schools if one is willing to kind of, you know, like they say, you know, think outside the box. And as I mentioned, our students have done well over the years. And what I would say in terms of, you know, assignments for students, juniors, sophomores, freshmen, is start looking at schools. I mean, it's tough to kind of you know, visit schools now, but do the research on them now. You have an interest in the school, you know, create an account or, you know, request some additional information. Also look to see this process as a more of a long-term endeavor in terms of, you know, keep doing research, then make some decisions, and research, make some decisions. Not only short term in high school, but also, you know, for college and beyond, as well too. As I mentioned, you know, as I meet with juniors, I give them some other schools to kind of consider as well too. So I would say, you know, follow up on those as part of like that acceptance rate, which is fairly high. I would say anywhere from 5 to 10% of the scholarships that are tendered to our students every year in the senior class. There's a certain percentage that is based through my recommendations on those schools. So that's, you know, just another reason to, again, to follow up and do the research on the schools, but also just to not to look at this process as, yeah, hey, I'm, you know, getting in. It's like the getting there and being there, and not so much worry about the name of the school, but, you know, finding a school that offers internships, required internships, you know, sophomore year and junior year. Maybe there's a study abroad component that's required for students, or, you know, every student has to do a seminar like their freshman year and junior year. So find schools that are they're that will make it work, to be quite honest. So I think that is a good way of going about this endeavor as well too. And think impact and initiative. Was it a counselor session a couple years ago at Johns Hopkins, and during the opening comments, they basically said, yeah, this is how we read applications. Like, what's the student's impact and what initiative have they had over the years? And that was, to me, like the best advice I could ever hear and pass on as well too. So it's not, it takes some hard work. There's nothing guaranteed. It's very competitive. But I think those are things to kind of keep in mind. My former colleague, brilliant man, Mr. Hirsch. And I think just, you know, think about the, you know, just the process and like, you're in respect it. It's sometimes it won't make sense. Things change each and every year. A lot of it, you have no control over it. Just understand that and accept it. But there's a lot you can have control over that. And a lot of that is really like your education. Like, what do you want to learn about, you know, in your field, like not only today, but tomorrow and next year and down the road as well too. So I think it's more so than ever before. It's like, it's more important ever to build your own, you're learning it, your education. And if you're a lifelong learner, you're going to be prepared for everything that the world is going to throw at you. And speaking of the world throwing things at us, yeah, it is any sort of trends colleges have seen over the years of just kind of, now they're on triage mode. They're trying to figure things out, as we all are. But looking at some things that may be taking shape, the emphasis of testing is changing. The rigor of one's courses one selects has become more important. Doesn't mean yet a student has to have 8 APs. There's been some research that anything beyond 5 APs taken in high school has little impact on a student's college, you know, grade point average. So there is some good hard data out there that it shouldn't be like a rush to get, you know, more and more and more. If you do enough, you do it fine, you'll be good. think colleges, though, even though they haven't been able to talk to students at college fairs and high school visits, they're actually getting their applications, and they're getting applications from places they never even thought of they would ever get, and nor have they visited. So that's been like a new wrinkle in this process. And I think they've expanded their applicant pool. They're able to do things that they haven't done before. What will happen for the class of 2022 and beyond, I don't know. Like the early action, early decision had an impact. This came out, I guess, in early December. So whether through their early action programs, which are non-binding, or early decision, which is binding, more students than ever before thought, hey, maybe it's my chance to get into UVA or Virginia Tech or Georgia, whether I have testing or not. And a lot of this is in a reaction. A lot of this is in reaction to a lot of schools being test optional this year, and more schools going test optional in the future. I think just this week, Penn State is going for another 2 or 3 years in terms of test optional as well too. So this, the impact of this remains to be seen. We'll see what happens when it comes to students enrolling in schools. And based on their numbers this year, what will happen next year in admissions? Will they under admit, over admit? Will they maybe over admit, just to kind of like, if we can shoehorn as many kids into our school to make up for the losses from the past 2 years, we may over admit. I don't know. It's trying to figure out certain professional teams, how they're going to finish the end of the year after like 2 games. Like you can't figure it out. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'm also gonna mention some books to kind of keep in mind as well too. So if you really want to look at some books to read, here's a couple that I would recommend. One is called The Chosen by Jerome Carabel. It sounds like a Stephen King novel. It talks about selective admissions practices at Harvard, Yale, and admissions over the past 150 years. Probably one of the scariest books I've ever read, but it's really good. Who Gets and Why by Jeff Selengo. This came out earlier this year. I would highly recommend it because it really gives a great snapshot of really what's going on now and in the short term. Very easy to read, very understandable. Not so much a how-to, but maybe it's like, okay, well, if you're doing this, you may want to consider this. So yeah, this is just a good book in general. And since I'm an admissions nerd, I even got him to autograph it and send me a book plate for it. This one's a little bit older, called Harvard Schmarvard, written by Jay Matthews, who is the education writer for the Washington Post. Jacques Steinberg, The Gatekeepers, a good read. And all these books are also in the PDF of the presentation. Michelle Hernandez, A for Admission. Lauren Pope, Colleges That Change Lives. Range by David Epstein. This is not so much a college book, but I think it may point the way in terms of what one should maybe learn more about in the future. He basically starts off talking about Tiger Woods versus Roger Federer, like where one person wouldn't specialize, another person didn't, and how this may impact not only the college search and the college experience, but like jobs, on down the road as well too. So I'm a huge fan of this book. Will College Pay Off by Peter Capelli. Dean Chamberlain got me interested in this book, and I think this is a really great book to consider as well too. And Jeff Selengo, There Is Life After College as well too. Another really good book to kind of keep in mind as well too. Came out about 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah, as you can see, you can do a lot of reading in this process, but I think it's just important, I think, to do things, research, have fun, think broadly, grapple with it. Don't try to figure it out because I think it used to be, you could see grades and GPA and everything. It's like, then you can figure out where you're going to get in. I had one applicant from my previous school, 2004. She got into Wake Forest and Notre Dame, and her parents didn't go to Notre Dame, which I think was amazing. but she did not get into Richmond and Colgate, and she puzzled on why she wasn't accepted. And I said, I figured it out. And she's like, really, you did? It's like, yeah, it's like if a 2-word school you got in, if it's a 1-word school you didn't. She's like, makes as good a sense as any. So yeah, and that happens, every year, when it comes to this. Yeah, the some of the attachments for the books there, it's on the slide as well too, the PDF that I sent you. So there's a lot of great information. But at this time, any questions that I can answer for anybody, you can put them in the chat. Since we have a smaller group, you can turn on your mic and ask away. If you noticed in my chat earlier, I did not attach a DPF. It was a PDF. A DPF is not a new version of the PDF. Some schools will also run webinars during the fall and spring as well too. Probably a good idea to maybe to sit on a couple of those just to see what they talk about, what the school is like. They'll probably throw out stats and numbers and everything. And again, it's when you hear, what was it this year? I got an email from Duke, and I don't know if you saw on that one slide, like their early decision numbers were up and their overall regular decision applications were topping like 50,000. And they're basically saying, yeah, our admit rate's going to be between 4% and 5%. And basically don't call us. It's like, we don't have the time or people to handle all the inquiries. So it's almost like getting struck by lightning in terms of getting in these days. And we'll see more later on in the springtime. And I think a lot of schools will be releasing their decisions like early April, 4, 5, 6, around that time frame. So I would say take a look to see around that time frame as schools release their data. Questions regarding the NCSA. I think it's a service for student athletes to go into so they can be recruited. Probably worthwhile, just with COVID having such an impact for such a long term over people's sports schedules and seasons, and getting for coaches to see student athletes and student athletes to be seen. It may be a worthwhile service. It depends on the cost. I think coaches in all sports have a good sense of what players are like and their skill sets, sometimes even at an early age. Again, like since I played volleyball, it's, somebody can walk into like a boy could walk into the gym and he's in 9th grade and he's like 6'7", and they're like, but they can barely walk in. But a coach could say, okay, I can't teach height, but I can teach them how to block and hit. And so they can, coach them up. So yeah, again, with those outside services, it may be worthwhile. But I'd say look into it, talk with, fellow classmates that may have pursued those routes. Google, do some search online. Is it a, worthwhile endeavor? My pleasure. Yeah, and it's also going to be interesting in the years moving forward regarding like programs of all sorts offered in colleges and universities. A lot of schools have cut athletic programs to balance the budget. So it'll be a work in progress. I mean, there's always opportunities for students to play club sports, maybe pick up a different sport as well too. So yeah, there's just a lot of change that's going on that college is going to have to navigate. I think short term, but also longer term as well too. Any additional thoughts, questions on selective admissions? Yeah, again, the PDF, the short version of the notes is on attached as a document. Also, um, the PDF of the presentation, also some notes. The books are listed as well too. I will do that again just to be on the safe side. So this is the agenda is there. That's the presentation as well. I know everybody has a very busy day on this Friday. I get to go back to or packing PSAT exams for 10th and 11th graders when we're done here. But I really wanted to kind of do this presentation at this time of the year with like the second semester beginning. In this way, I think, students can kind of get a sense as, the courses that they're going to register for, like perhaps for sophomore year and their junior year and their senior year, they can kind of use this information to kind of project out into the future. Another recommendation I think, which is a good one, is if students have a really defined area of interest, even now, it could be technology, it could be healthcare, I don't care what it is, to see if, I ask students, like, see if you can embed that concept of the academic leanings that you have into every single paper that you write, regardless of your class, whether it's theology or science or math or social studies, world languages. I'm not going to say do it for every single one, but if you're able to, that's not a bad idea. And I think that's a way of, really delving into your intended field of study a lot more. You can build up a catalog of research and knowledge that you can. So if somebody asked you in an interview on a college application, why do you have an interest in occupational therapy or mechanical engineering or art history, you can bring your experience of like, well, I've written papers on this topic here and this topic here and this topic here, because I really wanted to really delve into this area of interest. And I don't think colleges see that a whole lot. So I think that type of intent would be rare, and anything that's rare stands out. Like I said, sometimes just the differentials happen. Sometimes when you have to kind of really do this and put some time and effort and work into it. So I think that's just another thing, again, to keep in mind where the opportunity would present itself. All right, okay, encourage your students to stop by, ask questions. As I mentioned, that's on my bulletin board. There's some information written by one of my colleagues about looking at these selective schools as well too. But in turn, schools can become selective in a blink of an eye, sometimes overnight. I'm not forecasting University of Delaware is going to be super selective this year or next. We shall see. But sometimes that happens. The school wins an NCAA championship. That school becomes supernova hot. So there's a lot of things that impact, the admissions process at a certain institution. But the most important thing is really what the student does. I mean, the student really chooses what schools they apply to, and in the end, they choose which school to attend. So students really do. The students don't think they have a lot of power in this process. Oh, they do. They do. So I think it's really not about, again, the getting in part. It's like the getting there and being there and continuing on with one's education. So, all right. Well, I will let you leave since you've got, I'm sure you have a busy day ahead of you. So if you have any additional questions, I will stay on and answer them for you. But if not, thank you for attending. Enjoy the information and have a great weekend.